Hi, welcome back to the People, Analytics, and Future of Work podcast. And I'm here with Ian Cook of Visier and Brad Benson of Aptology. Gentlemen, how you two doing? Brad, specifically, we haven't talked before on this forum and really excited about what you're doing. So if you would introduce yourself and we'll learn a little about what you're doing and have a chat about it.
Yeah, so Al, thanks for having us on this call. My name's Brad Benson. I'm head of strategy at Aptology. And in a nutshell, Aptology is a AI-driven behavioral intelligence platform. And what that means is we're able to actually figure out what are the traits that actually differentiate top performance from everyone else at a highly predictable level. You can use that to go ahead and hire successfully, develop people, and then drive internal mobility, which is hugely important to drive the organization and longitudinal performance in a company. And the reason why we got into this is because of the fact that we saw a lot of trends going on in the marketplace through time. I've lived through them all. Best of breed in the 80s, ERP, Y2K gold rush in the 90s, back to best of breed in the 2000s with SaaS and everything else, and now back to single vendor quite a bit in the enterprise side. And then we're hitting best of breed again, basically, at this point in time. And AI is certainly driving a big part of that, along with analytics. But through all that time, one thing we saw that was challenging was the fact that if you went to HR tech conferences every year, you always saw succession planning at the top of the list. You saw attrition, you saw engagement. And the thing that I always thought about with that was the fact that we were focusing a lot on efficiency when we looked at transactional automation, going back to the early days. You're actually automating manual transactions. And then later on, you continue to refine those automations and the efficiencies in there. But the problem is, I think we lost sight of the quality of hire in this whole process and driving business outcomes. And it's not just the outcomes for HR, it's the outcomes for sales, for marketing, for engineering, for customer success, for finance, and all the other operational domains within a company. And so when we looked at it, we really said, God, I think a lot of those issues are symptoms of a problem, which is really performance fit in a role, basically. And how do you find the people that actually have their strengths play into that role? How do they know how to get in the right role so that they're actually going to be in a job they're going to enjoy and basically prosper in? And so we really wanted to come at this in both angles. One was, how do you take care of the employee? How do I not waste my time? Companies have the waste already built into their model, right? They already have the inefficiency built into their financials. But an employee does not. They don't really have that built in to say, I'm already calibrating a bunch of misses on my hiring plans, and I'm going to spend 12 or 18 months in a job trying to slug through it, blaming myself and wondering why it's not working out. Whereas we can actually go ahead and identify where are your strengths and how do you play to the roles that you've been most successful in, and vice versa. If you do that, the company wins at the same time. So everybody gets a win-win in that scenario. I avoid the jobs that I shouldn't be in, and the companies avoid all those misfires they have today. And if you look at sales, it's huge right now. You get 43% of reps making quota. I think if you look at that performance number, that's a pretty unsustainable and horribly negative performance level you want to get to. And the reality is what we're able to do by flipping the table and understanding what really differentiates top performance from everyone else, we can actually double their odds of hiring a top performer. So we're really about how do you flip the table? How do you make sure you're getting the right people in the role? And then at the same time, you're not stuck in the position they are today, for instance, with sales, which is, I'm just as likely to hire another low performer when I replace somebody. So I've got less than a coin flip odds of getting a good performer in the secondary state. Our goal is to flip that around so you can actually drive high performance in a company. That's the lifeblood, especially in sales of an organization. And at the same time, the employees getting the right role they want to be in, where they'll thrive and be successful. If you do that, and you at the same time really drive understanding their aspirations and what the career opportunities are beyond that, which we can identify. Now you've got longitudinal success with an employee. They're more likely to stay. They're going to be happy in the role and engaged. The attrition goes down. The engagement goes up, basically. And at the same time, we can also drive diversity in those roles, too, to make sure you're really looking at the talent that you might be overlooking today because of unconscious bias. So we really saw that we could actually knock off a lot of those symptoms by going after the core issue, which is really fit in the role, basically, both short term in the first role you get into, and then longer term in all the roles that come after that. Because employees right now, they're looking to career progress themselves along the way. And if you don't do it for them, they will progress themselves right out of your company.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There needs to be, some confidence that what they're doing now, both in their role and in terms of their development is going to benefit them, not only the organization. And that actually leads into, Ian, what you all are doing at Visier, because Brad, you were talking about engagement and some downstream outcomes. And I know, Ian, you've been working on doing this linkage, for years. So if you would introduce yourself and a little bit about Visier.
Yeah, so Ian Cook with Visier, spent my career kind of understanding how the people equation gets formed, as Brad highlights, so that people win and the business wins, and looking at the different parts of that. On Visier's side, we've been studying this whole effectiveness question. I think, again, Brad puts it really nicely. Like, we've been spending money on efficiency, like how do I make the change of address transaction faster? And we've kind of got to the end of that. There's not a lot more extra gain to be had. And what we've been working at and thinking about and helping clients with is the effectiveness question. Like, how do I help an individual understand their effectiveness? How do I help HR business partners with people managers look at the effectiveness of an overall population? And it doesn't come from one place. It comes from a collection of places. And at the core of that is the person. What are they capable of? What do they know? Where do they fit? Recognizing, again, just especially with some of the labor market numbers that are out there, that choice is really huge. So getting that understanding of fit, future, allowing people to manage that for themselves is really important. So, at Visier, we're looking at that big picture, understanding there's lots and lots of components that go into that picture. And our role is really to try and assemble that so that you can get the answer in one place. Running around, we're big advocates, like Brad, of the best in class and assembling best in class. And then if there's one place where that can hang together, then that gives you best in class with a simple interface to understand and use. And so that's a big part of the journey we're on with partners like Aptology, to say, get the right pieces of the puzzle together. You can still have all this fantastic capability consumed through a single pane of glass. It's often how our customers decide. It's like, I want all this power, but I want it through a single pane of glass. So I've been working out, like, what's the model and how do we create this single pane of glass? And again, engaging with fantastic organizations like Aptology to understand how do we get to the core of who the person is and really help them.
And if I can,
Brad, you go ahead. I have a question after this, but yes, please go ahead.
On what Ian said, basically, which is talking about the ecosystem and certainly talking about the challenges for HR in picking solutions. If you look at the problem, the way we look at the problem, we're moving from efficiency into effectiveness, but part of that means you're also moving from a single domain like HR to many different operational domains coupled up with HR. And that means, it's not about time to fill, it's about time to fulfill the promise of that role, basically, is more important, like how to get the right outcome. And to do that means you really have to understand what are the goals of both organizations. If it's sales and HR, how do I meet the operational viewpoint and the metrics to drive the business for sales, and at the same time get the horizontal benefits of retention and diversity and engagement and all the things you're looking for from HR. So how do you find that mutual outcome where both parties get what they need? And at the end of the day, that means you're driving down all the load that you have in HR for having to backfill a lot of jobs. Basically, there's so much load that HR has right now that they aren't planning for, because they're probably not budgeting for all the attrition backfills. They're probably budgeting for a lot of the net adds basically along the way. And so to do that, you really have to look at that outcome from an operational side to go, what is it I'm trying to do to move the business? And that puts HR in a really difficult position, because now you're saying they have to know every domain. They have to understand all the KPIs across those domains and how to make those things move and still drive the horizontal outcome. And that's a very tall task to have. And then on top of that, now we're in best of breed, to Ian's point. So how are they going to go ahead and even know which best of breed to buy? What's beyond the marketing, what's really going to move the needle? And then on top of that, how do I even integrate those solutions together? And I think that's one of the really powerful things about a solution, the single pane of glass, like Ian talks about, which is, if I have a BI solution on the front end and I can work backwards on the business outcomes and tie together all the solutions that give me the answers to the questions I need to answer to drive my talent decisions, that's where you drive the real outcome. And that's where you can actually see the congealing of best of breed coming together and taking some of that load off of HR from a purchasing standpoint. Show them the solution basically they can get to ahead of time so they know it, and pre-integrate that solution to make sure they're not dealing with that as an individual customer repeatedly across the marketplace.
Thank you for sharing that, Brad, because I want to step back to step forward. So if I'm a listener in HR, or if I'm a people leader, or just someone who's interested in how talent strategies are going to be formulated over the years ahead, with this proliferation of data and systems that are housing this data, it invites the question, what is the data that's there, and is that data appropriate to help me answer the questions I want or need to know? There's this presumption that, oh, we have all these systems, there's a bunch of data, let's just throw it together and out will pop this magical answer. But we have to be very conscious about what data we're creating in the first place. So Brad, can you explain a little bit about the unique nature of the data that you're collecting and that you advocate be considered by leaders who want to transform a culture and empower their employees to develop themselves?
Yeah, so you've got some key information about your employees you already have in an HR system, where they're working, who they're working for, when they were hired. You've got a bunch of data out there that's in that system. But at the same time, you need to aggregate together, we ingest also, what are the KPIs that drive your organization? If it's a sales organization, you're looking at revenue and quota and pipeline, a lot of different things that I really measure success by. That's how I define success in my organization. And you really have to marry both of those together to really figure out what truly differentiates your people from a top performer versus a bottom performer. To be able to then take that, turn that around and apply that to hiring, to apply that to development, to apply that to internal mobility, where your employees can go, now I can see the gaps I want to work on developing myself on the second and third roll down the line. So you're really getting that flywheel going on internal mobility and moving them on, and also letting them know, hey, maybe this job you thought you want isn't the one you want because it's really not playing to your strengths. You'd like to have those caution signs along the way to direct yourself. And so the key for us is having that marriage of data across domains. And then obviously beyond our solution, there's other data you want to have to make overall hiring decisions. It's not just what we have. And I think that's where Visier really comes into play, of marrying many different best of breed solutions together to answer those critical questions. And I think one thing that you mentioned that's really important here, Al, is the fact that, when we saw the early analytic solutions, you had the Hyperions of the world, and you had the business objects, and you had the Cognos of the world. People didn't know what to do with that. They bought a tool and they're like, okay, I got this tool, throw a bunch of data in there and see what happens. Well, now the problem is you've left it to a hiring manager, somebody else, to go, what matters? I don't know what matters. I got all this mountain of data in front of me, and they're not going to spend the time going through and figuring that out. Now, Hyperion, as an example, built some targeted solutions in financials and everything else to try to show a roadmap there. But I think you have to go ahead and marry the right data to answer the right questions and predefine that, so people aren't having to do that on their own. Just like you don't want them to have to integrate the solutions on their own either, right?
Yeah.
Those are insurmountable tasks.
Ian, I know you got some comments on that.
Well, I got several comments. We're going to kind of start with just that last point made by Brad, that we actually see very much what you describe in practice. The way that Visier was architected and the way we've gone to solving the analytics problem is actually to start with the business question. Because I think lots of people start with that, oh, what data should I have and how do I use it? Versus when you start with the business question, like, what do I need to know? Why do I need to know it? If I know it, why is it better than not knowing it? And actually go through that cycle. It then becomes a lot simpler to understand how to bring the data you need. And again, to a point that you always make, Al, being clear, like, why are you bringing this data in? Is it for a legitimate purpose? Is it, within the sphere of good ethics and being true to the business and the employees in equal measure? And you're doing it not just for the sake of having it, but actually because there's an end goal. Again, Brad highlights that I want to understand how people fit relative to how they perform. That's an important piece. Everybody, but lots of people I talk to, that productivity is kind of out there in this sort of general conversation, but when you come down to focusing on it, there is no such thing as generic productivity. Hours is a really poor measure for it in terms of hours worked unless they're billable hours. So you've got to get fine-grained about, well, which pieces of productivity we're going to assess, and then how do we understand good versus bad versus better versus what's possible. So thinking about the business challenge and how does HR solve for that before you get lost in all of the mess of the data is key. And the BI tools led you to the data piece first, as opposed to business question first.
As you're sharing, Ian, and Brad, I'm going to toss this over to you in a second, because it's dawning on me and my job here is to empathize to the extent possible, not only with you two, but with the listeners. And because everything that you're saying is making sense. And it's like, yes, we have to understand the business problem. However, our ability to translate those business problems into HR processes, into solutions that HR will either create or stand up that didn't exist before, or be refined of an existing process. My question to you, Brad, is why is this not being done more? What are the barriers to having a more holistic, disciplined approach on how data is being used, how the employee experience is created, and in turn, talent strategies are more systematically formulated? Why is there not more rigor to this right now? What do you think needs to be done to solve that?
I think one of the issues out there, if you look at the marketplaces and you can quote 40 billion or 50 billion for either CRM and sales tech, or the same thing from the HRMS side. And so if you look at the informatic basically drawings of every vendor and every subspace, they've got a daunting task to figure out even what do they implement on each domain side. What do I do for the sales tech, or what do I do for HR tech? And they're following that roadmap, and they're going, I got to do all these things. These are the basic things you should do. Well, they're so busy with that. They aren't thinking about, but I want to enable my people in sales. I want to develop them. Do I have the right person in the role before I spend all that money? Mm-hmm. And so I think they haven't stopped to recognize that the basic metrics are showing them they're not performing at an optimal level. And then maybe they ought to reprioritize which things they're implementing, which things actually get the biggest bang for the buck right now. Is it doing a bunch of training for people, horizontal way, basically, that don't have the right baseline behaviors that are going to drive success in that role and the right competencies? Or is it getting the right people in there first and then layering on top of that? And so I think people are struggling to figure out what the right priority orders are, and they're following the roadmap in their particular domain. And they're just so busy with that. I think at the same time, I think they kind of are used to the idea of heavy lift implementations. They're used to the ERP implementation. It's a big monolithic thing. It's not agile. And so those things have this, oh my God, I don't have time for anything else in my job. And the reality is you don't need a lot of time to do some of the things we're talking about. These can be 4 to 6 week projects to get started in an agile way, like you would do agile development. Agile development, you don't do the big waterfall projects anymore. You implement a giant system. You implement and learn, and you basically keep on adding to that in an agile manner. I think people aren't used to that agility because their past experience with solutions is so heavyweight and so enterprise.
Yeah. And you take it from there, because when you say we, it's like HR has been making sometimes decisions in a silo or with kind of ancillary input from the organization, and there needs to be a more integrated approach, arguably, that includes operations and facilities and legal and IT, of course. So, Ian, what are your thoughts there?
I think there's 2 thoughts to kind of follow on from what Brad was saying. I think one is habit, which is, the habit has been to drive efficiency. There has been an incredible amount of efficiency to drive from the 90s. I remember paper forms with carbon paper in between, and you ran it into the printer and produced 3 versions, and you put them in the filing cabinet. Like, I think about a SaaS on-premise a SaaS HRIS right now. Like, we've been going through that journey. And so there's an element of like, our habit is to think about efficiency. So people are just waking up to the effectiveness question. And then the other is, that habit leads an assumption. We see this frequently in kind of prospect calls. Like, somebody gets excited by the prospect of having the kind of analytics that they've always dreamed of. And then they take a deep breath. Is like, so how hard is this to implement is the question. You can tell that, they've had one of those 12, 18 month, like all hands to the wheel implementation experiences in their past, and they're just not ready to go there again. Right. Right. And so it takes a bit of people to change that assumption and break the habit and go like, modern, especially analytics technology, doesn't implement that way. It's iterative. It's best done iterative. Whereas a transactional system, you're putting the data in, you're putting it in a table, you're locking it like gold into the secure storage mechanism. Analytics application like ours, we literally kill and publish the full data set every day. Right. So it doesn't matter if you get it wrong, because it could last for 20 minutes and be gone. Like, right. We just rebuild it and rebuild it and rebuild it. So if you don't have that picture the technology and what they do is like, well, if we put data in there and it's wrong, oh, we'll live with it forever. Like, yes, HRS world, sure. You put data into analytics technology, oh, if you want to kill it, it'll take us 20 minutes to put some new stuff in there. Like,
Right.
and if you haven't had that experience, you're like, it's that easy. It's like, it's that easy. So I think it's habit and then assumptions about, you know, this is enterprise technology. It's going to be a big heavy lift. Oh, I'm too tired. So
yeah. And everyone, to your point, Brad, as well, is like everyone has their own perspective and ideas and priorities. And so I just want to call something out and get your take on it, is that, you know, Brad, you're talking about this is going to affect hiring practices. This is going to affect internal mobility. It's going to affect, you know, workplace strategy. And so a lot of things, and these are formerly disparate disciplines or functions, sometimes within HR and outside of HR. So yeah, what are some of your ideas to bring in, and I'm going to use a word that I'm kind of entrenched in and talk about habit, is governance. Is, you know, how do these decisions up front get made more thoughtfully, and how, as soon as a purchase decision is made, how does the actual action happen? Because the last thing employees want is some, you know, promise that, you know, it's going to get better and the organization not deliver. So, you know, Brad, your thoughts there around, you know, more systematic discipline, governance, and decision-making, implementation, and enhancement over time.
Yeah, so I think it's the same agile approach. So if you think about it and thinking about starting, how do you just get started in a simple way? And so our focus is always about, don't worry about all the development stuff right away. Focus on just the hiring piece. And that includes internal mobility, which is like, you know, get this in place, know what differentiates success, and then survey all your people in many different domains. We have an example of a company where they're a supply chain automation company, which has done very well in COVID, obviously, with Amazon and everybody else selling and delivering. And the key being that we recognized suddenly that their best source for talent was their engineering team, not the outside sales hires. And it was a faster route to teach people who were really technical, who understood the complexity of their solutions, how to sell them. It was to take technical salespeople and teach them their solution, how to get things done in their company. And so it's just like, and they're like, oh, it's easy to backfill engineers. It's hard to find great salespeople. So the key is just illuminating. You can just go ahead and survey everybody, and we don't charge for that. We want you to survey everybody. We want you to unlock these sourcing pools. We want you to unlock that internal mobility. But to do that doesn't take anything. There's no time and effort involved in that. And you can start up on the hiring side. And then you can learn how do I have governance, and how do I approach hiring somebody from another team, and unlocking that. But I think companies need to quickly move on that, because right now, there's a lot of talk about marketplaces and internal marketplaces. And unfortunately, I think the biggest beneficiary of your internal marketplace is your competitor right now. There's more friction to move internally in a lot of companies than there is to move out of your company to a competitor. And so I think really recognizing and acknowledging and promoting managers who do a good job of developing people and moving them on, rather than those that kind of hoard and hide and kind of bury them to where they leave the company anyway. I think you have to recognize the habits, the good habits of good management, and fostering that facilitation of internal mobility. And that's something you can quickly learn how to do and basically have some oversight on. But I think you have to kind of let it agilely build itself to some degree. I think you have to trust people at all parts of the organization versus command and control, and let them figure it out to some degree, but get the flywheel going, you know, get them using this. I think they're tired of losing talent. I think they're tired of getting the wrong talent a lot of times. But the problem is they're also part of the problem. They want their talent fast. And so they still want the efficiency and the speed of getting people hired, not thinking about the connection to the ramifications of having the wrong people longer term and having to backfill again. So that's my short answer.
Yeah. Well, I have a book behind me by Thomas Chamorro Per Music that echoes what you were saying, and that we as organizational leaders need to do a much better job identifying what a excellent leader looks like. what are the behaviors, what are the habits, and have mechanisms to assess and develop those. And a lot of times there's been a miss between what's been incentivized and what has been some of the learning experiences and what actually works. And I know, Ian, you've spent your career investigating what actually works and what's happening. So what are the thoughts that you have in that Brad just shared?
So again, as always, like a couple of things. I think what's becoming increasingly important for organizations to understand is the amount of data that is available and capturable and usable. It's become, I don't know, 10 times easier than it was back in the days. Like, it's not necessarily different data. If we think about leadership, way back when, we'd put somebody through an assessment group. You go away for a weekend, you're watched by 5 psychologists, they're ticking things off on their clipboards, they're getting together and having meetings. Like, you're spending $5,000 to $10,000 per person to do a really, really robust write-up on where are they good, where are they strong, and we're doing that. Now, that same, it's not necessarily exactly the same depth, but a sufficiently good picture can be made through technology, literally in minutes. Like, we've taken all of that knowledge and we've built machine learning and assessment capability and understanding, so that I can get a good working model of a person that they can understand and you can use. It's just that shared, not just for me, not just for you kind of balance piece, you can use and make available. And so you get past a lot of the challenges of the like, just say the observed world, where our managers hoarded talent. Like, is this person any good? Oh, no, like, they're not ready to move yet. But I heard they're really good. Well, who told you that? And it's all about protecting talent. It's all that game that happens in terms of the politics. Whereas when you put it into data and you make it available and you make it standard and you make it something across the business, it illuminates the conversation for everybody, and it illuminates the opportunity for so many more than it has in the past. So like, and that's this, people often fear about putting data against people, and I think there is legitimate, fear is the wrong approach. I think there's legitimate concern. Like, we have to make it so that it's the person benefits to the same extent as a business. But the opportunities I see to really enable individuals to thrive, and with that the business, from this digitization of that kind of knowledge, are just, they're so profound that it's exciting. Being part of it, helping people understand how to access it is just, again, I just think it's a really, spent a long time waiting for us to be here. So I'm excited that it's coming.
And all three of us have this luxury or anguish of perspective that has been afforded us by time. So we've seen when people say Cognos and Hyperion and business objects, we've played with those tools and we've dealt with the shortcomings and the challenges. And this is actually leading into a question, because again, if I'm listening, I'm like, damn, those guys know their stuff, except this guy who's talking right now, but those two guys know their stuff. And it then invites the question, well, if I want to do this in my organization, who do I need to do this? And so I've long been a proponent that this doesn't happen by magic. You don't buy a HRMS and all of a sudden you have the insight you need to run your organization effectively. So Brad, I want to go back to you, because we didn't spend too much time there at the outset when we talked about your background. So if you don't mind sharing a little bit about how you got to where you are right now, and if you can conclude as to why you founded Aptology, because you've been through a journey. You could have done different things, and you could have been sailing in Sweden, or you actually did that. But what's your inspiration for doing what you're doing right now?
Yeah, so I think when you're talking about our experiences, and before you were saying we were all old, which is appropriate, basically.
I did not say that. I plead innocent. I might have implied it.
No, I've been both fortunate and grateful to have gone through a lot of different trends in the marketplace over the years, and to see what drove those and see what we didn't get accomplished. And that goes back to the 80s. I was at Accenture, building custom HRMS systems or implementing best of breeds before we even had ERP at that point in time. And it was all mainframe. We were just automating manual processes at that point, whether it be financial, bookkeeping, or HRMS. And then PeopleSoft, I got to run development there for HRMS and financials, and got into the internet focus on how do you do web-based applications. But that was a big gold rush during the Y2K. Everybody rose with the tide, whether it be PeopleSoft or SAP or Oracle or anybody else along the way, because everybody was on a hard race to get their systems converted before Y2K hit. But during that time, we were focusing on efficiency once again. We were just automating benefits. We were just automating payroll. We were just automating base HR, hire, transfer, termination. And then during the 2000s, I had the opportunity to go into Taleo and run products and technology there, pre-IPO, and really get to see the SaaS environment, see the opportunity there to keep your customers current, because of the fact that, an ERP company, they had a lot of these companies as their customers, but they were so customized and so many releases back, they couldn't take advantage of the new functionality, even if you built it on the on-premise solution. And so that really opened up the door to us to bypass IT and to bypass the issues and go to best of breed on ATS. And then we certainly saw the aggregation and talent management, where customers once again are going, oh no, now I got to deal with all the integration again between learning and development and performance management and ATS. And that drove all of us to look, buy our neighbors or build the equivalent of our neighbor to consolidate the talent management space. And then obviously Workday came along and finally moved the ERP into the SaaS cloud-based world, and Oracle and SAP followed suit by acquiring first and then building native solutions. But during all that time, the key that I saw all along the way was the fact that, to your point earlier, we weren't doing a good job of measuring what drives a great manager. How do we measure real performance there? Because manager is such a linchpin and leverage point in terms of people staying with the company, or people developing within the company, people moving on to other opportunities in the company. At the same time, we really didn't do a great job on the quality of hire. We really figured out how to hire the wrong person faster, basically, because we didn't know what good looked like. And I'm not trying to make light of that, but the key being, it was really around, how do I make recruiting more efficient? How do I make HR more efficient? As opposed to, what's the best outcome for the business? And how do I measure that outcome? And then how do I work backwards to Ian's earlier point, which is, if I know the outcomes, what are the questions I need to answer? And by doing that, I'm not only driving the right outcome backwards and driving the solutions to deliver on that outcome, I'm also standardizing that outcome. Because right now, if you go into like a sales organization, if you ask a bunch of different hiring managers what they think good looks like, they're going to have different answers. And if you ask the recruiter, they're going to say, I'm just following what's on the job description. And quite frankly, when we find out that job description doesn't really match what we find really differentiates performance in that role when you look at the actual data. And so really, by figuring out what truly drives the needle and drives revenue attainment, or drives innovation in product, or drives happy, satisfied customers, or drives lead generation and marketing, you really have to figure out what that definition of success looks like. And then you standardize that across everybody. And that's where you can marry together the talent acquisition and the HR side with the business domain, because now you have a common language to speak to, right? What am I trying to, what outcome am I trying to deliver that we all benefit from? If I deliver your revenue attainment, you're going to have better engagement, you're going to have better retention. I have less backfills to do. I'm not spending all my time refilling the job I filled a year ago. Everybody wins in that scenario. So it's not just about the employee and the company winning, it's about all these multiple domains winning, because now they have a common outcome that they're married to, that they're figuring out how to go ahead and deliver on. And I think everybody wants that. They're all struggling, they're all underwater trying to keep their head above water right now. How do I just keep things moving? And how do I do the next thing I'm supposed to do from a hygiene standpoint to get better? And you really need to step back and go, what's better for the company? How do we work from the front backwards, to Ian's earlier point? That's really imperative, I think, basically, to go ahead and get the right outcome.
As you're talking, it's dawning on me that the discussion that you're describing often isn't had, even if there's a leadership team of HR leadership team, HRLT, and they're there talking about their processes. They're talking about what's going on in their particular silo 9 out of 10 times. And again, I'm not coming in as a cynic or being harsh. I'm just talking about reality. There's certain processes that need to work. People got to get paid. There's stuff that needs to be done. To have this strategic discussion and understand how the dots connect, literally, the data connects, how the logic connects, testing the hypotheses, all that takes a certain set of skills, certain set of ways of being, like awareness of how the world might work, and of course having the analytical chops to go and actually get it done. So Ian, can you speak to your background a little bit, and taking off that last comment, because I know you have those skills in spades, and I know it's critical for this discipline, but what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, you're triggering lots of thoughts, Al, as usual. I think it does come down to HR working in the business as opposed to working on the business, and there's a growing group, and it's certainly a coming sort of generationally coming into the HR domain who are interested in people and less about the sort of administration and legal compliance, and are more about what I'd classify as the organizational development, like how do people thrive. And what I find with a lot of those folks is they'll have a general business background that then specialized in HR, or potentially they came from marketing and kind of fell into HR. Some even come from finance and fall into HR. What I find with that population, with this, like the broader exposure to the business, is they're quite comfortable going and talking to a head of sales. And so, back to your question, like how does this get started? Well, often it doesn't actually get started in HR. It actually gets started with a piece of the business going like, so if you could have 20% better population overall, what's that worth to you? Light bulbs go off, budgets start to get formulated, projects get kicked off, stuff happens. Maybe you don't get the 20%, maybe you get 30, maybe you get 15, but like this stuff happens. I mean, Brad and I, when we're talking, just when we're getting to know each other as businesses, we're the same exact experience. Like HR, these kinds of technology projects, these kinds of ways of evolving the practice tend to happen more with a business sponsor. So domain expertise, people insight, kind of good HR governance from the core HR group, but a friendly business sponsor who's equal party to creating momentum. And we see it in our deals, we see it in our practitioners, where there's I made this for the business with HR, as opposed to HR made this and we hope the business uses it. That second approach we know fails most of the time. The first approach, we're seeing great results. And again, Brad's connection is, I'm not just measuring people for the sake of measuring them, I'm measuring them so that we impact sales, so that we impact call center results. It's like it's right into the so that the business does something better.
So if I can play that back, HR in that scenario is most effective functioning in effect as a facilitator, as opposed to the owner of the process. To your point, they're not working on the business, they're working in the business as a true collaborative thinking partner, someone who actually then goes and executes on the back end. Is that right, Ian?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They're taking the people component of the business problem to the business, because often either the business doesn't have time, or is misunderstood, or doesn't know what's possible, but they're very willing to give energy and time if it's properly positioned. So that that big piece is being able to articulate, does talent that is 20% better make a difference to you? If the answer is no, then that's fine. But if the answer is yes, then you've got the beginnings of a partnership to really help shape the business. We tend to find those work better.
And just, I'm going to kick this over to you, Brad, because I've seen many organizations take what I would call a technology-centered approach, or a data-centered approach, thinking, okay, I'm going to get this technology, it's going to solve everything. But there needs to be a process built around it, of which HR is uniquely positioned to facilitate, not only because in its core job, it needs to understand human and organizational behavior. It is also the case where there's privacy and security around the data. So it can't just be flying around, all over the place. So yeah, Brad, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I definitely want to echo a bunch of the things that Ian mentioned. I think a key one there is the fact that I think HR has been put in a difficult position, historically speaking, where, it's people related, delegate to HR, but they don't manage these people day to day. They're not the ones driving the performance on the operational side. They're not the ones managing the talent there, but somehow they've been relegated to sort of being asked to pick the systems and implement these things. And I think you can't solve the problem unless it is a real joint venture. Basically, it's HR and marketing, HR and sales, HR and engineering. It's really figuring out, how do we drive the right outcomes for the business with our people, because people are the biggest asset and the best asset basically to drive that outcome. And so having that conversation, understanding what really are the defining metrics that drive the business, and then how do we deliver on those metric improvements is the first conversation you have to have. And that's what we have a conversation on when we get into a discussion with a prospect, is the fact that you're not just talking to sales in one example, or just talking to HR. You're bringing them together within the second meeting, because of the fact that it really is, how do we mutually define that outcome for the business? And it takes both parties to do that, because they're both going to be investing time, investing effort, and they're both going to be beneficiaries of that outcome. And so it really is a mutual opportunity. And that's come into vogue. You have to do that, but also because of the fact that there's so many decision makers in deals today. Sales has gotten a lot more complex. You've got a lot of people involved. You've got more legal, you've got the privacy, you've got all the procurement, you've got the various functional domains. There's a lot of players in there. And I think you really have to make sure they have a unified view. What do they think they're buying? Are all those people thinking they're buying the same thing, or do they all have their own exclusive view on what they want to get out of it? I think you have to have that mosaic, that aggregate of what are we all going to deliver to the business, and we're going to play our part in making sure that happens, as opposed to it's just about me getting my efficiency gains in my area, as opposed to looking at it, how's everybody win? How do we drive the right outcome for the business? And whether my part's basically, I don't get as much benefit out of it, but I can help drive huge aggregate benefit of the business, that should be the outcome everybody's looking for.
Is what you're describing, Brad, a key barrier to relatively low adoption? And embedded within that is, do you think the process that you described is widely adopted, as pervasive, or do we have a long way to go when we talk about the total population of, say, just U.S. businesses, for example? I mean, I have my own opinions on this, but what are yours, Brad?
I think it depends upon the company. I think some companies are early adopters and are basically very focused on driving those outcomes. I think others aren't yet prepared to go ahead and make that agile change, but I think it's going to come quickly. I think COVID really brought on a renewed focus on accelerating a lot of these transformations going on. People really, after they got over what do I do? My people are all remote. I don't even know how this is going to work. They really focus a lot on their people. It's like, how do I understand my people? How do I get my arms around my people? And how do I think about what's the new normal going to look like? We've seen a dramatic change basically in terms of people recognizing we're not going to, it's going to be a hybrid. It's not going to be the way it was before. If you look at sales, for instance, it's all remote selling now. They went from a huge focus on field sales and a lesser focus on inside sales to everybody is selling remotely. And that's really flipped around. What defines a great salesperson in COVID, and what defines a great salesperson post-COVID, based upon how they decide to redefine how they go to market. And so I think you're also seeing a bigger focus on inside sales roles, SDR, BDR roles, and everything else, because people are recognizing the digital transformation is coming, and it's coming faster than expected. And COVID was a key wind at our back to go ahead and drive that change. So I think you're going to see faster transformation than we might have said we'd expect to see 18 months ago.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. Ian, your thoughts there, because yes, COVID has been a big kick in the tail in many ways. It's also been the case where we talk about habits and organizational inertia. There's already been some kind of falling into old habits because, hey, I've been a leader for 30 years. This is the way I've been doing it. We just had this little blip, and we're going to go back to kind of the normal ways of doing things as functional silos. Other organizations have said, wow, this is really integral to how we need to operate moving forward. And if we're going to do this, what data and insight are we going to be looking at on an ongoing basis? And to our earlier point, that just doesn't happen by magic. That needs to be work done. So how pervasive do you think this new means in which to formulate work strategy is? When I say work strategy, is not only hiring and developing, but really, should they be in office? Should they be at home? What are your thoughts there? Is it widely adopted that we have this integrated governance model and how we formulate, measure, and manage work strategy over time? Or do you think we still have a long way to go in most organizations?
I would say we still have a long way to go in most organizations. What I anticipate is that it will be the curve at which it's changing has had a massive uptick, and the pace at which it will continue to change will actually increase the uptick. Sort of, as you were explaining the question, light bulbs going off kind of as you were talking there. Some of the data that's flowing through is there's been a demographic bubble, the boomer generation. They've been delaying retirement up until last year. I think retirement rates are 2 or 3 times what they were. And so the millennials were the majority in the workforce about 2 years ago, but that starts to take a quantum step. So the energy in the organization is just generally younger because there's a lot more younger people. And then they take on new leadership roles, they try things. It's natural when you're young, you try things. And we have the new experience of being able to pivot during COVID like nobody thought. You know, stuff was happening in 3 weeks that would have taken 3 months or 6 months. So what I don't know, and I think what's really hard to gauge, is which organizations are going to hold on to that speed of decision. You know, they enjoyed it, they understood it, they collectively as a culture can keep it and use that to drive performance. What number of organizations are going to go like, oh my God, that was too much. Let's just kind of go back and, you know, build consensus and spend time pondering. It's going to be somewhat of a bell curve. How much is on each end, who knows? But I think it'll become more pervasive. I think it's really more of an emerging practice that's going to start differentiating the winners from the losers, as opposed to everybody's operating this way. I think there's now proof point that running an organization from an agile perspective works. I don't see everybody running to adopt it because it takes a different set of habits. But I think we'll see more organizations using it. I think we'll see more organizations, you know, working to build that muscle, and so will become much more of a habit. But we're really at the point of that starting to form, as opposed to, hey, everybody's doing this.
If I could jump in real fast too on that, Ian, those are great points. You know, the millennial shift. I think another shift that's going to come, and it's going to force the flip as well, basically, is the fact that people are going to quickly see that they're at a competitive disadvantage if they're not making these changes, basically. And I think that's going to be a massive change from the C-level on down of like, boy, we're behind. We need to get a move on. Now, obviously, you don't do everything overnight, and it's, you know, it's an agile approach where you crawl, walk, and run. But I think you'll see a huge push on that in not too distant future. And that'll be a big pressure point to drive adoption, I think, and to drive penetration within a company.
Yeah, I 100% agree with both of what you said. I believe the opportunity cost is not only in productivity, it's in well-being, it's in diversity and feelings of inclusion, pay equity. I mean, all these topics, which are high priorities, not only for CHROs, but for, you know, boards and certainly C-level staff. It's like, how do you move the needle when you don't know where the needle is or what trend, you know, it's heading, or the drivers of that needle, you know? So it's very simple for us because we're not only drinking the Kool-Aid, we're making the Kool-Aid. So, you know, we'll call that out. But at the same time, you know, if we're jumping up and down and say, gosh, you know, we not only need the data and systems to, you know, capture and analyze this data, but we need the processes by which this insight to get adopted and in turn action, you know, being taken. So, you know, Ian, I'm going to toss this over to you, and I want to focus a minute, if you would entertain me, on diversity and inclusion, because that obviously is a huge topic. It's not going to go away, nor should it. And so many organizations have had a chief diversity officer for 20 years, been under-resourced. You know, they've been primarily an influencer, but now they're integral to how these talent strategies are being formulated. They need data to understand historical dynamics and need to be able to set goals and actually go out and achieve those goals. So can you just speak to your hope in this particular arena of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how, you know, Visier and other solutions are, I would say, and this is my own words, necessary, not nice to have, but essential to actually tackling these tough problems?
Totally. A couple of things you said just around the evidence for the change, like there's a belief, but beginning of this year, Element put out research on buying behavior, buyers, 60% of buyers will buy based on alignment of social justice. It used to be 47%, and now up to 60%. So any brand out there that has a public profile has to understand that their social justice stance will affect their revenue. And that's, it's flipped from the wrong side of 50 to the right side of 50. Additionally, the SEC regulations came in. Like, this is all 2020, so forget COVID. These are major effects in their own right. The SEC disclosure rules come in. All the reporting I'm seeing is that diversity statistics are core in there, because you start looking at, well, my diversity perspective, inclusion perspective can actually affect my revenue. The SEC is asking me to disclose on things that could affect revenue that relate to people. Like, it's diversity ceased to be a nice to have. Right. It's the kind of thing that CalPER is a large investment group, BlackRock, large investment groups, they're going to want to understand not just what's your big round number for diversity, where are Black women in leadership roles, what's the succession pipeline look like, how's the mobility of that population happening. It's way beyond the kind of end state reporting that you can pull out from an HRS. It is into the detail of trend and change, so that you can forecast and move towards a future goal and make statements on it, as opposed to simply like, yeah, we shipped the numbers, we're fine, we forget about it for another year. Like, it's really massive step change in the urgency and the attention. And we're even finding people coming to us because their board have asked them to get on top of this, because their board know they're on the hook for the SEC commentary. So it is, I mean, you put it well, Al, it's not a nice to have. This should have been at the heart of business, and the things that are moving around business have put it there firmly, for sure.
Well, thank you for that. And Brad, I want to toss the same question over to you, and I'd like you to, if you would, because I know Aptology actually gets at this problem as well, in highlighting opportunities and so forth. So without going further, Brad, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, so we built our platform at the beginning, basically going after this is one of the key pillars. It wasn't just performance and engagement and attrition. It was really going after, how do you drive diversity? And that's another solution. They think you need to have that in your organization. It's like part of your balance sheet today. It's basically, to Ian's point, it's going to be measured, it's going to be illuminated. And quite frankly, if you don't deal with it, you're going to be at a disadvantage against your competition as a business. Forget the doing the right thing. From a business standpoint, you're going to be disadvantaged. And so when we built this, we really looked at the fact that, if you look at behavior, and we made sure we tested this exhaustively to make sure there was no disadvantaging or bias based upon gender, ethnicity, race, socioeconomic level, anything else, basically. And behavior doesn't really bias on that. Basically, you have to make sure you test it, and we do massive testing there. We do massive testing with all of our AI work to make sure we're driving out any bias and we're getting bias free, because of the fact that at the end of the day, people are investing in the diversity officers and everything else, and they're putting a lot of investment in, but they're not getting the quick turnaround they hope they would get. It's not completely catching on in the organizations. You've got a lot of unconscious bias out there at the management level and others, basically, or even just looking at what school somebody went to, or what company did they come from, or what's on their resume. And so our goal is to really get rid of that unconscious bias and drive a standard. We're trying to find people that will succeed in the role regardless of their background. And by getting them in, obviously, you've increased your sourcing pool, basically. And at the same time, this is why we want you to survey everybody in the company, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of people like women looking at management positions. They may not apply for positions. They may think they're not going to get it or something like that. So if we can illuminate who's got a great shot early on, and those people can be identified and fostered and developed, basically, you drive a much better outcome from a diversity standpoint, but you also drive a better holistic outcome for the company and for every employee in the company. And so the key being, that's a huge lever companies need to be looking at, both for the right reasons as well as for just pure business reasons. And so that's foundational to us when we look at the marketplace. You have to focus on that to remove all the inherent bias that exists today.
Yeah, just to translate that into my very simple language, because I've long put forth that we as human beings, after the basics, want to be seen, we want to be heard, and we want to be empowered. And so what I'm hearing you say, Brad, is that you're doing just that. It's like, hey, I am here, you're listening to me, and you're empowering me to go and have the professional experiences, the learning experiences to get to that next level. And now it's not just, an internal talent marketplace that's esoteric, it's actually tangible, and the probability that it drives the desired outcomes is heightened. And to your point, both of you made, we have a responsibility as leaders to create a culture that enables this internal mobility upwards and not suppressing talent. And so, particularly as we come out of COVID, whatever that means, there's a lot of articles and there's research that shows that there's a lot of high value talent with itchy feet. And it's like, hey, I've got, as the economy starts to spin up, if my organization hasn't treated me well or hasn't shifted, then I'm going to have options. And that's already prevalent here in the Bay Area. So, I want to kick it over to you because we have time for a few more questions. And I would be remiss if I didn't, ask this, because you and I have known each other for a number of years, and we have been pretty lockstep in the fact that we have to think about how we're going to bring this data together over time, because there's acquisitions, there's different buying decisions being made over time. So the idea that IT, given all its priorities, is going to magically prioritize HR data, and all of a sudden, we're going to have this magical database that's out going to pop the answer. And you and I have heard it a number of times over the years. So my pointed question is this: if you're coaching an HR, CHRO, or a head of people analytics, or head of talent, or somebody who is responsible for the culture and talent strategy, why is having a tool like Visier essential? And it might sound self-serving, and it is, but what I will say is this: it is absolutely essential that there be a tool like Visier in place. It's not going to happen, otherwise. So can you speak to that from your perspective, please?
Absolutely. It speaks to a lot of what people assume. Again, a kind of common perception of analytics is that it's an in-state activity. Like, we do a bunch of stuff, it produces some data, we then look at the data to see if it works. That was the reporting world. And again, that is a habit from the past. Like, we did a lot of hiring, we counted the hiring. Truly, if we're going to get the strategies right, you've heard the complexity of the world we're living in just through the conversation we've had. So how do you formulate strategy if you don't have data? Like, I don't know how anybody can intelligibly formulate a people strategy today without some data about who do we have and where do they work and what do they work before, what do they want to do, what can they do. I mean, we're just surrounded by organizations who are questing for that information, and it's not slowing down and it's not changing. So if you actually want to be strategic in HR, the only way you get there is to actually source the data first, understand those trends and changes, so that when you make a strategy, it's focused. It's not, well, let's just do this for everybody and hope some of it sticks. It's not, well, let's just do what everybody else did because it worked for them, it'll work for us. Like, we know those don't work. So the only way to truly actually, from my mind, to execute HR strategically is to bring the data first, have it inform what you do, have it inform where you do it, who you do it with, so that you have a higher chance of success, your resources are really well positioned, and you can then track it through. And then it just becomes a cycle. Again, yep. We're moving away from this. I think even finance is moving away from this annual plan with annual budgets with annual pieces to something that's far more short term. So, having finance make an annual plan and then fitting your HR work to it, we're just not going to be living in that kind of staid world. So again, it's clear I'm passionate about the space and have been for a while. So clearly I see this, but I don't know how people are formulating strategy without having the data first. And I fear what comes from that when you do.
And just to be clear too, and forgive me, Stacey Harris is the author of the study. I think it's Sierra Steeder still, but I might be messing up the name of the organization. But I think it was, if a company has over 10,000 employees, they have an average of 15 HR systems within. And so if that's the case, all those 15 systems have a dashboard and they have an analytics value proposition. And, oh, give me your data and we can all stage it in here. But it's not that simple. And, and I don't have to tell you how,
No.
to deal with hierarchies, different types of data sets, having the Rosetta Stone of the employee ID and keeping anonymity. I mean, all that stuff can make someone's, mind just go numb. So it takes work and it takes thoughtfulness. And I'm going to kick this over to you, Brad, because I know you've been in the HR tech space in one form or another for 20 plus years, and you've wrestled with this problem. It's the case that if we don't think systematically, if we don't think not only about the data and bringing it together and being able to analyze it, what you're doing, correct me if I'm wrong, in Aptology, it's not only data for data's sake, it's appropriate data to answer the questions leaders want or need to know. So Brad, can you give your thoughts on, okay, you're coaching a CHRO or someone like him or her, what is your advice, not only to get started, because many would say, oh yeah, we're doing that, but really to take it to the next level and get to this agile place where you can be responsive to the needs of the organization and be efficient and effective, with your budget and with your people.
Yeah, I think it starts with one thing, which is I've talked to a lot of CHROs, and I think a lot of them are very strategic these days, basically, and they are talking to the business. They're having these conversations every day with the head of sales and the CEO, and where are we pivoting? Do we have the right people for tomorrow? I think the challenge is when you go down the organization, people are process oriented, basically, and so I think it's harder to move some of those pillars as quickly as you'd like. But I think when it gets back to your point about having that many HR systems, the fundamental issue for me is myself as an operational manager or leader, I'm not going to go into 15 systems. Right. I'm not going to use all those. And quite frankly, I think you've seen less than adequate adoption of people going into HR systems to answer the key questions to drive the business, because that's not where their data resides they want to have, right? They need to have the data pulled out of there and be able to consolidate that information. And like the point we had earlier, drive the right outcomes, ask the right questions, and then have it be actionable analytics, where now I can trigger the transactions behind the scenes. So what do I want to trigger in HR system 1 versus 2 versus 3? But I still need those transactions, right? I still need to facilitate those, but I need to have a better abstract to go ahead and see the information together, where I am going to go in there and daily go, what are my top of mind questions do I have to answer today? What are the outcomes I'm trying to drive right now? And then which actions do I take as a consequence of looking at that data quickly? And so I think you're going to see a lot more focus in the future of applications being a lot more headless, basically, where the fact is, they're providing the backbone and the information. They're not necessarily where I'm going to go. I'm not going to go to 5 different BI platforms and in 5 different solutions to natively to do my transactions. I want to have that pulled up front, basically, and consolidate that. So I want to drive and drive our armada, and then have a bunch of behind the scenes fulfill those decisions along the way. So I think you're going to see quite a bit of an evolution in that direction in the short term. And I would recommend HR users look at recognizing that to figure out, how do I get that consolidated view first, even if it's not great at first, if it's not pretty, but having the data there and the right data is a starting point for that. How do I answer the questions that matter to each of my constituents and get that moving? It doesn't have to be pretty, basically, but it has to be effective. And then you can work on how do you make and improve upon that over time.
Yeah, no, well said. And that's actually a great segue into one of my final questions here. And I'll toss it over to you, Ian, because when we talk about data transparency and data mobility, it speaks to what you all have kicked off there at Visier with the People Intelligence Alliance. Can you speak from your perspective the goals of the People Intelligence Alliance? And for those who don't know what it is, can you just introduce it a bit?
Yeah, it's a recognition across a series of vendors who really want to see people data used, but used well and used in a way that honors the person and helps the business to resolve some of the perceived challenges that would sit with an individual that's going for best in class. And so as a set of vendors, we are we're sharing knowledge, we're sharing understanding of each other's technology, we're sharing the data structures on the back end so that the movement of data becomes seamless, easy, the knowledge is there and the support is there. I mean, the simple examples are we show up with a joint client of Aptology or some of our other partners. They say we want to work together. It's like, great. We get on the phone, we work out what works. We resolve how to make that work between our two technologies. I mean, as we grow, more of us are getting ahead of that. So you don't even have to get us on the phone. We kind of worked it out before we even start. Again, we've got some specific deals going on where two pieces of PIA are being purchased at the same time. They already talk to each other. The client doesn't have to think about it. And so there's an element of that understanding about data mobility, and then there's the broader piece of making sure that the data is used well. And so sharing thought leadership, participating in these kinds of discussions so that we can help people access knowledge and insight about what's possible, how do I get it done, how do I follow the paths that have been built by others and get myself to success quickly, and just making that really available and spreading that spreading that knowledge is a key part of it as well.
Yeah, love it, because there's been a few cycles of this, which I know you both appreciate, where a certain vendor wanted to be all things to everybody, and it just didn't work. And then there's middleware, and there's try and talk to there's ETL and tools, and there's just all this stuff flying around all over the place. If there's more openness from the get-go and a common set of practices and the means in which technologies can communicate and share their APIs and have data flow, would be much better and more efficient for everybody. And we'll talk about the ethics and security on another talk. But for now, there's a balance between the data flow and also the constraints. So I'll just call that out. Brad, as we start to wrap up here, if you have any comments on the benefits of data transparency and data mobility, and also if you would just share a little bit as we start to wrap here about Aptology and how people can learn more about it and you.
Yeah, so just piggybacking on what Ian said, I think when I look at what Visier is doing and with the alliance, it's like we're building a quilt together, right? And everybody's got their quilt pieces, and really the outcome is that quilt's not a quilt until you put it all together. And nobody's buying a piece of a quilt. They want to buy the whole thing. They want to have somebody predefine what that looks like. They want to predefine what the outcomes are I'm looking for, what questions am I answering basically along the way, rather than I'm doing a consulting project every time I go ahead and aggregate systems. And so I think that's a huge step change. And back to your point, Al, no one vendor is going to deliver everything. We don't presume that we're going to solve all the problems and solve all the issues, and nor do we believe anybody else is going to. It's really going to take a coalition of companies that all have the same end goal and mindset in mind to go ahead and work towards driving faster aggregation of information, and also faster transformation and integration of the information, and then at the same time making sure that they're protecting the data. That's obviously privacy is paramount to this, so people have to trust that this information, which is very proprietary, is not going to be it'll be exposed in any way where they're going to be concerned about this. And so but you've got a lot of great companies out there that know what they're doing. They've all wrestled with all these issues, but their vision's bigger than their ability to deliver on their own. And I think that's where people recognize they need to work together and find like-minded companies, and also find the best of breed companies that they think should be put together, so that they're not putting the customer in a position of having to figure out which one's best of breed. I don't even know the difference between these companies because I'm looking at the marketing. It all sounds good. It sounds like you all do the same thing. Right. And the point is, unless you're really super technical and get underneath the surface and have the time, you can't figure out the difference. And so I think, having us sort of self-select, like we're working with Visier and others, that's really going to do a huge service to the customer on the buy-in side. They don't have to wade through that. And every customer doing the same thing repeatedly, we have to take that load off of them and make sure we're giving them a real solution that they can implement in a timely manner and drive real outcomes, versus the historical ones where I got a promise of an ROI, it's a massive implementation, and I never quite realized what I thought I was going to get with all that spend and all that time and effort, right? Right. The kinds of things we're talking about are quick wins that you can get. They have huge differential outcomes for the business. They're very material monetarily. If you look at some of the things that Visier is doing, the things we're doing, it's massive dollars that you can drive into your out of your organization or into your organization if you're looking at revenue in a relatively short period of time. And so if you want to learn more about Aptology, certainly connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to have you connect with me there. And then certainly at our website, www.aptology.com, great place to find out about how our solution works, what we provide for our customers, and the kinds of things you could expect if you work with us in the future.
Outstanding. And Ian, bring us home with a little bit about how a listener can learn about you and Visier.
So Visier, the website, is a great place to go. We recently ran Outsmart, which was an on-demand conference, really high attendance. It's still open for on-demand. We had some fantastic speakers, talking about the space and kind of way to go. And then myself, LinkedIn is the best place to find me. I run a Thursday debate around questions about people analytics, and they're always posed as opposing views of what's the right way to go. So find me. There's now about 5 months of history on those once every week. So it actually becomes quite an instructive way to understand, how do people see the practice and what is common and what's not common. So, dig in there, surface some of those old posts. There's some really quality information there about how to start working your way into being successful at people analytics. And I love to share what we know. So thank you.
Well, I certainly recommend it. And I certainly appreciate both of you for sharing today. Thank you for doing what you do and being who you are. And hope to see you in person before too long. Yeah.
Al, thank you very much. Appreciate the conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Likewise. All right. You be well.
See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.